Rakari assassins mercilessly slit the throat of Earth's heir, 6-year-old Elijah Burns, son of war hero Patrick Burns. Earth's Parliament vowed swift, bloody vengeance, unleashing a secret fleet to scorch 1,000 Rakari worlds. Patrick slammed his fist on his desk after watching the urgent video message in his quarters on Earth's primary space station. A Rakari Black Ops unit had infiltrated the station to abduct Elijah, his son. They believed Elijah's rare genetics, a human Rakari hybrid, could advance Rakari biotech and give their military an edge. Relations between humans and Rakari had collapsed recently due to the Rakari's aggressive expansionism in the galaxy, conquering and enslaving other races. Now these Rakari scum had targeted Patrick's son as part of their plan to dominate the galaxy. They would likely strike within 12 hours. Elijah was in grave danger. The video ordered Patrick to secure Elijah and evacuate him to a safe house on Earth's moon base immediately. Heart pounding, Patrick tried contacting Elijah's caretaker droid. No response. He pulled up security camera feeds near Elijah's room, static on every screen. Those Rakari bastards were already moving. Patrick grabbed his sidearm and sprinted out of his quarters toward Elijah's room, praying he wasn't too late. If Patrick didn't reach Elijah in time, he would lose the only family he had left after his wife died. And if the Rakari captured Elijah's genetic code, they could create an army of superhuman hybrids, conquering Earth and wiping out humanity. The fate of Patrick's son and the future of the human race itself now rested on Patrick's shoulders as he raced to confront the Rakari infiltrators. He would save his son and make the Rakari regret ever setting foot on this station, or he would die trying. This time it was personal. Patrick's boots thudded on the steel floor as he ran toward Elijah's room, heart pounding. The door was cracked open, the lights off. Patrick slowed, tightening his grip on his pistol. He nudged the door with his foot. It swung inward with a creak. The bed was empty, blankets tossed aside. Across the room the caretaker droid lay crumpled and unmoving, its limbs bent at wrong angles. Patrick's breath caught in his throat. Where was Elijah? A small form burst out from under the bed and grabbed Patrick's leg. He almost fired on reflex, before he heard the terrified whimper and looked down to see Elijah. The boy was shaking like a leaf, but seemed unhurt. "The monster came through there," Elijah whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the back wall. Patrick followed his gaze and saw a gaping, ragged hole carved into the wall. The edges still glowed red-hot from the Rakari phase blade that had cut it. It led right into a maintenance tunnel, the perfect way in. Patrick scooped up Elijah and ran, keying the emergency lockdown code into his comlink. Alarms started blaring. He sprinted for the main hangar, the fastest way off the station. Elijah clung to him, face buried in his neck. The hangar was pure pandemonium. Security workers shoved screaming civilians into escape pods as fast as they could. Patrick pushed through the mob, aiming for his ship, the Cerberus. A massive jolt shook the station before he reached it. A Rakari warship appeared out of nowhere overhead, its cloaking shield flickering off. It immediately opened fire, escape pods bursting into flames under the onslaught. In the chaos, a huge clawed hand grabbed Patrick by the neck from behind and spun him around. He found himself inches from the faceplate of a Rakari commando, eyes glowing with fanatical rage behind the visor. The fingers started to close, choking him. Patrick kicked at the commando's knee with all his strength, but the armored shell didn't even dent. Black spots crept in at the edges of his vision. He grabbed for his gun, fired blind. The plasma bolt hit the Rakari right in the face, melting through his eye lens. The commando reared back with an echoing roar of pain, dropping Patrick. He hit the deck, gasping for air. No time. He grabbed Elijah and ran up the Cerberus's ramp. The ship barely cleared the hangar before the Rakari unleashed one last barrage, piercing the station's reactor. The entire structure exploded, a huge ball of fire erupting into the void. The shockwave hit the Cerberus like a hammer, sending it spinning wildly. Elijah screamed. Patrick fought with the controls, trying to steady their vector. Behind them, the remains of the station glittered, Nothing but a twisted metal husk. Elijah stared at the wreckage, his eyes huge with horror. He pressed himself against Patrick, shaking. Patrick's hands tightened around the Cerberus controls, the ship shuddering as he pushed the engines past their limits. The debris of the destroyed station fell away behind them, but a new threat loomed on the radar display. The Rakari warship, a sleek dagger of a vessel, surged after them, rapidly closing the distance. "Come on," Patrick muttered through gritted teeth, fingers flying over the console as he diverted power from the weapons to the engines. He had to get more speed, had to put distance between them and the Rakari. In the co-pilot's seat, Elijah sat rigidly, eyes fixed on the void ahead, too terrified to make a sound. A flash of blinding light. Patrick flinched as a plasma bolt lanced past the cockpit, near enough to rattle his teeth. The Rakari had opened fire, and their superior weaponry meant they could shoot at the Cerberus long before Patrick could shoot back. The pursuit dragged on, the Rakari ship inexorably gaining ground. Patrick swerved and juked, hands a blur on the controls as he narrowly avoided the incoming fire. But he knew, with sinking certainty, that he couldn't evade them forever. Sweat trickled down his temple. He glanced at Elijah, the boy's pale face, and made his choice. His fingers danced across the keypad, inputting a string of commands. The computer beeped affirmatively, and a countdown appeared on the main screen. 30 seconds. No time to explain. Patrick lunged from his chair, scooped Elijah into his arms, and ran. Behind him the timer ticked down. 25 seconds. The escape pod waited at the rear of the ship, cramped and utilitarian. Patrick practically dove through the hatch, Elijah clutched to his chest. His hand slammed down on the eject button. The pod blasted free of the Cerberus, thrusters flaring. Through the tiny porthole, Patrick watched his ship dwindle to a speck. 5 seconds, 3-1. Behind them, the Rakari ship tried to swerve, but too late. The edge of the blast clipped it, shields flickering and failing. It emerged from the inferno spewing smoke, wounded, but still in the fight. Inside the pod, alarms shrieked. Hull breach, life support failing. Patrick's stomach clenched as he realized the damage they'd taken. Not enough air for both of them. Not for long. His hands shook as he pulled the pod's sole EVA suit over Elijah's head, sealing him in. The boy's eyes widened with understanding. He reached for Patrick, a thin wail building in his throat, but Patrick pulled back. Gently, he strapped Elijah into the acceleration chair, then bent over the control panel. A few taps and the autopilot was set. It would take Elijah to the nearest human outpost. He would be safe. His head swam, vision tunneling. With the last of his strength, he hit send. The comm unit clattered from his hand. He slumped back in his seat, the edges of his sight turning black. The last thing he saw was the escape pod speeding into the void, carrying his son to safety. Then the darkness took him. The escape pod drifts, a speck of metal lost in the vastness of space. Inside, Elijah floats in his EVA suit, the pod's artificial gravity long since failed. Tears leak from his eyes, drifting in shimmering globules before his face. Through the viewport, he can still see the fading glow of his father's funeral pyre, the fiery remnants of the Cerberus scattered across the void. Hours pass, or perhaps days. Time loses meaning in the pod's confines, with only the unchanging view of distant stars for company. Elijah drifts in and out of exhausted sleep, the suit's gentle hum and the sound of his own breathing his only lullaby. But each time he wakes, the pod's air feels thinner, staler. A cloying scent fills his nose and mouth, the sickly sweet tang of his own exhaled carbon dioxide building up. The pod's life support, never meant to last this long, is failing. Elijah's head feels heavy, his thoughts sluggish. He knows he should try to stay awake, but the urge to sleep grows overwhelming. His eyelids droop closed. A sudden jolt wrenches him back to consciousness. Out the viewport, something blots out the stars. A ship, all sharp angles and matte black metal, materializing from the void like a wraith. It bears no markings, save a small Earth flag, the vibrant blue and green stark against the hull's darkness. A hatch yawns open on the ship's underside, and Elijah feels the pod lurch as an unseen force seizes it, reeling it in like a fish on a line. The pod shudders as it's pulled through a docking bay's shimmering atmospheric containment field, then settles to the deck with a clang that vibrates through Elijah's bones. He struggles to sit up, limbs trembling with weakness as the pod's hatch hisses open. Blinding light spills in, silhouetting a group of figures in the doorway. Soldiers, clad in midnight black tactical gear, pulse rifles held at the ready. Their leader steps forward, faceplate opaque and unreadable. He reaches into the pod, hands surprisingly gentle as he helps Elijah stand. But Elijah's legs, atrophied from hours of confinement, give out immediately. The soldier catches him, supporting his slight weight easily. He can't finish the question, but the soldier understands. He hesitates, then reaches up and removes his helmet. Beneath is a face weathered and scarred, eyes holding a deep, aching sorrow. "I'm sorry, son," the soldier says, voice gruff but not unkind. He kneels, bringing himself to Elijah's eye level, and grips the boy's shoulder. "Your father, he sacrificed himself to save you. He was a hero. His bravery won't be forgotten." Tears well up anew in Elijah's eyes, a choked sob escaping his throat. The soldier squeezes his shoulder once, then stands, guiding Elijah out of the docking bay. The ship's corridors are narrow, claustrophobic, lit by harsh white light. Armed soldiers seem to fill every corner, their faces grim and determined. The soldier leads Elijah to a small med bay, where a doctor in a crisp white coat waits. The doctor checks Elijah over, hands gentle as he scans for injuries, treats the boy's dehydration. As the examination ends, the soldier reappears in the doorway. "Rallying point?" Elijah asks, voice small and confused. "What rallying point?" The soldier glances at the doctor, something unspoken passing between them. He turns back to Elijah, expression serious. "The entire Earth Defense Fleet is mobilizing," he says. "Your father's final message, it was a call to arms. He broadcasted it on a quantum-encrypted channel straight to Earth's military command." The soldier pauses, as if weighing his words. "He told them everything. The Rakari attack, their plan to take you, to use your genetics for their schemes. His last words were a plea for Earth to find you, to keep you safe. And a warning that the Rakari's actions could only mean war." The soldier's gaze grows distant. The Defense Fleet's existence has been Earth's most closely guarded secret for decades, a hidden ace in case of exactly this kind of crisis. And now they're preparing to strike back against the Rakari, to make them pay for what they've done. Elijah listens, eyes wide, trying to process it all. It's too much. His father gone, Earth on the brink of war, and him somehow at the center of it all. A broken sob wrenches from his chest. He curls in on himself, small and lost, tears flowing freely. The soldier's face softens, moving slowly, giving Elijah time to pull away if he wishes. He sits on the edge of the medbay cot. His arm settles around Elijah's shaking shoulders, offering simple, wordless comfort as the ship carries them on through the silent depths of space. The dreadnought shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the blue-green orb of Earth filling the viewscreen. Elijah stared at his home planet, a lump rising in his throat. It seemed impossible that only days ago he had been a normal boy, playing with his friends and going to school. Now his father was dead and the galaxy was on the brink of war. Commander Reeves placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "We'll keep you safe," he said. "Your father gave his life to make sure of that." Elijah nodded, blinking back tears. He followed Commander Reeves off the bridge, the Admiral's words still ringing in his ears. War. The word seemed too big, too terrifying to comprehend. They had barely taken a dozen steps when the ship lurched violently, throwing them against the wall. Alarms blared, red lights flashing. Elijah's heart raced as he struggled to his feet, ears ringing. "What's happening?" he cried. But Commander Reeves was already sprinting back towards the bridge, barking orders into his comm unit. Elijah ran after him, fear rising in his throat. He burst onto the bridge just in time to see a massive Rakari warship filling the view screen, its weapons glowing as it prepared to fire again. The Admiral was shouting orders, her face grim. "Return fire, evasive maneuvers!" The dreadnought shuddered as its own weapons discharged, lances of blue-white energy streaking towards the Rakari vessel. But the enemy ship was too fast, spinning away and returning fire in the same motion. Commander Reeves hauled Elijah to his feet, his face streaked with soot. "We need to get to the escape pods," he shouted over the blaring alarms. "The ship is lost." Elijah stumbled after him, coughing on the acrid smoke. Around them, the dreadnought was coming apart, explosions rocking the corridors as they ran. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Before them stood a squad of Rakari soldiers, their armor splattered with blood, their weapons trained on Commander Reeves and Elijah. "Surrender the boy," the lead Rakari growled, "and your deaths will be quick." Commander Reeves stepped in front of Elijah, his rifle raised. "You'll never take him," he snarled. The Rakari opened fire, plasma bolts filling the air. Commander Reeves returned fire, his shots taking the lead Rakari in the throat. But there were too many of them, and they were too close. Air bolt caught Commander Reeves in the chest, burning through his armor. He staggered, dropping to one knee, but kept firing. Another shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, his rifle clattering to the deck. "Run, Elijah," he shouted, blood bubbling from his lips. "Run!" Elijah hesitated, torn between fear and the desire to help, to fight. But Commander Reeves's eyes met his, pleading. Elijah turned and ran, tears blurring his vision. Behind him he heard the Rakari's weapons fire twice more, then silence. He ran blindly, stumbling through the smoke and the flames, the ship disintegrating around him. At last he found an escape pod, its hatch still sealed. His hands shook as he punched the release code, clambering inside. As the pod blasted free of the dying dreadnought, Elijah huddled in his seat, arms wrapped around himself, shaking uncontrollably. Through the small viewport, he could see the Rakari ship pursuing, growing larger by the second. Earth loomed before him, beautiful and blue, achingly close. But as the Rakari ship closed in, its weapons charging, Elijah knew with cold certainty that he would never reach it. The pod shook as the Rakari opened fire, alarms shrieking. Elijah closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But the end didn't come. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Elijah opened his eyes. Out the viewport, a second Earth ship had appeared, placing itself between Elijah's pod and the Rakari vessel. It was smaller than the dreadnought, sleeker and more agile. As Elijah watched, it danced around the Rakari ship, peppering it with weapons fire, drawing its attention away from the escape pod. Elijah's comm unit crackled to life, a woman's voice filling the small space. "This is Captain Olivia Novak of the EDF Starfire. We have you, Elijah. You're going to be okay." Elijah slumped back in his seat, exhaustion and relief washing over him in equal measure. On the screen, the Starfire was leading the Rakari ship away, its superior speed and maneuverability allowing it to stay one step ahead. As the two ships receded into the distance, locked in their deadly dance, Elijah felt the escape pod's engines kick in, propelling him towards Earth, towards home. But even as the pod descended through the atmosphere, even as the sprawling megacities of Earth appeared beneath him, Elijah knew that nothing would ever be the same. The Rakari had struck at the very heart of the Earth Defense Force, and they had nearly succeeded. This was only the beginning. The war for Earth, for the very future of humanity, had begun, and like it or not, Elijah knew that he would be at the center of it all. The dreadnought shuddered slightly as it dropped out of warp, the sudden deceleration pushing Elijah back in his seat on the bridge. He leaned forward, eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. The curved horizon of Earth filled the bottom half of the view screen, a breathtaking tapestry of blues, greens, and swirling white clouds. But it was what hovered above the planet that drew Elijah's gaze and made his breath catch in his throat. Ships, dozens of them, hundreds. A vast armada stretching as far as the eye could see, glittering in the light of the distant sun. Frigates, cruisers, battleships, carriers, vessels of every size and designation, arranged in precise defensive formations around humanity's homeworld, the Earth Defense Fleet. Elijah felt Commander Reeves's presence behind him, the soldier's hand coming to rest on the back of the boy's chair. Even without looking, Elijah could sense the tension in the commander's posture, the tightness of his grip. The dreadnought glided forward, moving to take its place at the head of the formation. On the bridge, Admiral Ivanova stood with her back to them, hands clasped tightly behind her. She stared out at the assembled might of Earth's military, her face an unreadable mask. The sound of the bridge door sliding open made Elijah turn. Commander Reeves stepped forward, coming to stand at attention before the Admiral. Elijah trailed behind him, suddenly feeling very small and out of place amid the bustle of activity on the bridge. Admiral Ivanova turned to face them. Up close, Elijah could see the lines of stress around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. When she spoke, her voice was grave. "Commander Reeves, Elijah." She nodded to each of them in turn. "I'm afraid I have troubling news. Our long-range sensors have detected a massive Rakari fleet approaching, far larger than the force that attacked the outpost." Commander Reeves frowned, his brow furrowing. "The Galactic Council?" Admiral Ivanova nodded grimly. "It seems they're throwing their full weight behind the Rakari's expansion. And Earth—" She gestured to the viewscreen, to the blue-green globe below. "We stand directly in their path." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. Elijah could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He thought of his father, of the sacrifice he'd made. Had it all been for nothing? Commander Reeves broke the silence, his voice tight with barely restrained frustration. "Admiral, with all due respect, even with the defense fleet, we're vastly outnumbered. The Rakari—" "I'm aware of the odds, Commander," Admiral Ivanova cut in. But there was something in her voice, a hint of something Elijah couldn't quite place. A glint in her eye that spoke of a hidden ace up her sleeve. She turned to Commander Reeves, her gaze intense. "Commander, I need you to take Elijah to the Dreadnought's most secure quarters. Stay with him. You're his personal guard now." Commander Reeves looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the Admiral's expression made him hold his tongue. He nodded curtly, then turned to Elijah. "Come on, kid. Let's go." As Commander Reeves led him off the bridge, Elijah glanced back over his shoulder. Admiral Ivanova had turned back to the viewscreen, her posture rigid, her hands once again clasped tightly behind her back. The doors slid shut, cutting off Elijah's view. He followed Commander Reeves through the ship's corridors, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Suddenly the Admiral's voice crackled over the ship's intercom, echoing through every corridor and compartment. Elijah paused, listening, as did Commander Reeves and every other soul aboard the dreadnought. "Soldiers of Earth," Admiral Ivanova began, her voice steady and filled with a quiet intensity. "Today we face the greatest threat humanity has ever known." She spoke of the Rakari's brutality, of their utter disregard for human life. She spoke of the attack on the space station, of the many lives lost, of the attempted abduction of a child, and here Elijah felt a lump form in his throat. "Patrick Burns sacrificed his life to save his son," Admiral Ivanova said, her voice taking on a hard edge. "He embodied the very best of humanity, our courage, our unwavering resolve in the face of adversity. Let his sacrifice be a rallying cry for us all." Through the viewports, Elijah could see the ships of the Earth Defense Fleet beginning to move, arranging themselves into an attack formation. A thrill of fear, mixed with anticipation, ran down his spine. Admiral Ivanova was still speaking, her voice rising now with a fierce determination. "For years we have known this day might come, and we have not been idle." Hidden shipyards, built in secret on the far side of the moon, have been working tirelessly to construct a new class of ship, one designed specifically to counter the Rakari's advanced technology. Elijah's eyes widened. He turned to Commander Reeves, a question on his lips, but the commander shook his head, his gaze fixed on the nearest viewport. Out in the void something was happening. Space seemed to ripple, to waver like a mirage. And then, with a flicker of light, a ship appeared. Then another, and another. Soon a second fleet was visible, hovering behind the Earth Defense Fleet. But these ships were unlike anything Elijah had ever seen. Sleek and angular, they looked more like blades than ships, their hulls a deep, matte black that seemed to absorb the light. They bristled with weapons, strange and alien, pulsing with an eerie blue glow. "Behold," Admiral Ivanova said, her voice ringing with triumph, "the Scythe Fleet, Earth's secret weapon against the Rakari menace." A cheer went up from the crew of the dreadnought, a sound of hope and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Even Commander Reeves, usually so stoic, allowed a grim smile to tug at the corners of his mouth. As the Earth Defense Fleet and the Scythe Fleet moved forward as one, Admiral Ivanova's voice crackled one final time over the comm. "All ships advance. Let us show the Rakari the true strength of humanity. Let us fight for our homeworld, for our very existence, for Earth." In his quarters, Elijah huddled close to Commander Reeves, fear and hope warring in his heart. On the bridge, Admiral Ivanova stood tall and proud, her gaze fixed on the viewscreen as the first Rakari ships came into range. The void around Earth blazes with the fury of 1,000 suns as the Earth and Rakari fleets collide in a maelstrom of fire and debris. The Scythe ships dart through the fray, their angular hulls seeming to slice the very fabric of space. Rakari ships shatter under their onslaught, hulls splintering and venting atmosphere as the Scythe's advanced weapons find their mark. But for every Rakari ship destroyed, more surge forward to take its place. The Rakari fleet is a hydra, endlessly regenerating, implacable in its advance. On the dreadnought's bridge, Admiral Ivanova's eyes narrow as she surveys the tactical display. Her fingers fly across the console, rerouting power, repositioning ships. Every move is calculated, precise, a dance on the edge of a knife. Suddenly the bridge plunges into red light as alarms blare. "Rakari battleship bearing 030, a crewman shouts. "They've broken through our lines." Admiral Ivanova's head snaps up, her gaze locking on the viewscreen. The Rakari ship looms before them, its hull pitted and scarred, its weapons glowing with hellish light. "Divert all power to forward shields," Admiral Ivanova commands, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for impact." The Rakari ship's beam lances out, a spear of pure energy. It slams into the dreadnought's shields, the force of the blow sending shudders through the entire ship. Lights flicker, consoles spark and hiss. In his quarters, Elijah screams as the ship bucks and heaves. He clings to Commander Reeves, his small body shaking. Commander Reeves holds him tight, his face grim as the room shakes around them. Back on the bridge, Admiral Ivanova braces herself against her console as the ship groans around her. "Shields holding at 30%, a crewman reports, his voice strained. "Rerouting auxiliary power." "Return fire," Admiral Ivanova orders. "All batteries full salvo." The dreadnought's guns roar to life, a thunderous cacophony that reverberates through the hull. On the viewscreen, the Rakari ship's shields flare and die under the onslaught. Explosions blossom across its hull, fire and shrapnel erupting into the void. But even as it begins to break apart, the Rakari ship unleashes one final volley. Missiles streak from its launch bays, leaving trails of fire in their wake. They race towards the dreadnought, towards the bridge. Admiral Ivanova's eyes widen. There's no time to evade, no time for anything but a final desperate prayer. She closes her eyes, bracing for the end. But the end doesn't come. A shadow falls across the bridge, a shape blocking out the stars. A Scythe ship, sleek and deadly, darts in front of the dreadnought. It's a sacrifice, a life given for many. The missiles slam into the Scythe ship's hull, and for a moment, the void is lit by a second sun as the ship explodes in a brilliant burst of light. The dreadnought is spared, but at a terrible cost. On the bridge, Admiral Ivanova bows her head, a silent moment of grief for the brave souls lost. But there's no time for mourning, not now. The battle rages on, and it's becoming increasingly clear that despite the Scythe's advanced technology, the sheer numbers of the Rakari may prove too much. Earth's ships are being pushed back, inch by bloody inch. Admiral Ivanova's face is drawn, her eyes haunted as she watches the tactical display. So many ships lost, so many lives snuffed out, and still the Rakari come, an endless tide of hatred and hunger. Just as despair begins to take root, a shout rings out across the bridge. "New contact," a communications officer yells, his voice edged with disbelief. "Unknown ships dropping out of warp on the Rakari flank." Admiral Ivanova's head snaps around, her eyes narrowing. On the view screen, space ripples and distorts as a new fleet emerges from the void. But these are not Rakari ships, nor are they of Earth. They are a ragtag assortment, a motley collection of vessels from a dozen different races. Some are sleek and advanced, others battered and scarred from countless battles. But all share one thing in common, a fierce, unyielding defiance in the face of Rakari aggression. It's the Galactic Resistance, a loose alliance of those who have suffered under the Rakari's brutal expansionism. And at the head of this fleet is a ship that dwarfs even the mightiest Rakari dreadnought. Its hull is a patchwork of scars and repairs, but the name emblazoned on its side strikes fear into the heart of every Rakari, the Hammer of Tordak. Tordak. The name is a legend, a whisper of hope in the darkest of times. A Kryn warlord, a scourge of the Rakari, long thought dead. But here he is, his ship leading the charge as the resistance slams into the Rakari flank. The Rakari, caught between the Earth fleet and this new threat, falter. Their formation breaks, ships scattering like leaves in a gale. On the dreadnought's bridge, Admiral Ivanova feels a flicker of hope kindle in her chest. She leans forward, her eyes fixed on the view screen, watching as the tide of battle begins, ever so slowly, to turn. The battle rages on, the void of space lit by the flashes of countless weapons. On the bridge of the Earth dreadnought, Admiral Ivanova grips the arms of her command chair, her knuckles white. The ship shudders as another Rakari salvo slams into its shields. Suddenly the comm officer shouts over the din of battle, "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Hammer of Tordak." The view screen flickers, and the scarred, weathered face of Tordak appears. His eyes, despite the weariness etched into every line of his face, burn with an unquenchable fire. "Admiral Ivanova," he says, his voice a gravelly rumble, "I'll dispense with the pleasantries. We both know the situation is dire." Admiral Ivanova nods curtly. "Agreed. What do you propose?" Tordak leans forward, his image looming large on the screen. "I have a plan, a way to end this battle, and perhaps this war. But—" He pauses, his gaze heavy with the weight of what he's about to say. "It will require a sacrifice." Admiral Ivanova's eyes narrow. "Explain." "My ship is equipped with an experimental weapon, a singularity generator. It can create a black hole." Tordak's voice is grim. "If we detonate it in the heart of the Rakari fleet, it will tear their ships apart, scatter their forces." Admiral Ivanova's breath catches. The implications are staggering. "But the generator, it's unstable, isn't it? Once activated, it can't be stopped." Tordak nods. "Correct. Whoever activates it, they won't be coming back." A heavy silence hangs on the bridge. Admiral Ivanova closes her eyes for a long moment. The weight of the decision settles on her shoulders like a physical thing. When she opens her eyes, they are hard with resolve. "Do it. We'll give you your opening." Tordak nods, respect and something like sorrow in his gaze. "Understood. It's been an honor, Admiral." The screen goes dark. Admiral Ivanova turns to her crew, her voice ringing out across the bridge. "All ships commence fighting retreat. Draw the Rakari in. Let's give the Hammer of Tordak a clear run." As the Earth fleet begins to fall back, the Rakari ships surge forward, sensing victory. They pour fire into the retreating Earth vessels, heedless of the Hammer of Tordak, charging straight towards their center. The Rakari fire on the Hammer with everything they have. The ship's shields flare, absorbing the onslaught, but they're failing fast. Just a little longer, just a little further. Just before the shields collapse entirely, Tordak's face appears on the view screens of every Earth ship. His visage is a mask of determination, his eyes alight with a fierce, unwavering resolve. "Today," he says, his voice a low growl, "we show the galaxy what it means to stand against tyranny. Today we give our lives so that others may live free." With that he cuts the transmission. Moments later, a blinding flash erupts in the heart of the Rakari fleet, a light so intense, so searing, it seems to set the very fabric of space ablaze. The singularity generator has detonated. The Rakari ships, caught in its inexorable pull, begin to distort. They stretch, they twist, they crumple like tin cans, and then, one by one, they vanish, swallowed by the insatiable hunger of the newborn black hole. In mere moments, the once mighty Rakari fleet is reduced to nothing more than scattered debris, drifting in the void. A cheer goes up from the Earth fleet, a cry of victory and defiance, but it's tempered by the knowledge of what was lost. The hammer of Tordak, the legendary ship and its legendary captain gone, sacrificed to secure this victory. In the aftermath, as the Earth ships begin the arduous task of repairs, Admiral Ivanova sits in her quarters. Before her, a hollow image of Tordak flickers, casting a soft blue glow across her face. She had known him only briefly, but his sacrifice, his unwavering commitment to the cause, had left an indelible mark on her. In that moment, she makes a silent vow. Tordak's death will not be in vain. Earth will stand with the galactic resistance, will fight until the Rakari threat is nothing more than a bitter memory. Her thoughts are interrupted by a chime at her door. It slides open to reveal Commander Reeves, and at his side, young Elijah. The boy's eyes are red-rimmed, his cheeks stained with tears, but he stands straight, his chin held high. "Admiral," he says, his voice wavering only slightly, "I want to join the fleet. I want to fight the Rakari like my dad." Admiral Ivanova feels a swell of emotion, a complex mix of pride and sorrow, and fierce, unyielding determination. She rises from her seat and crosses to Elijah, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you," she says softly, "and when you're ready, when you're old enough, I would be honored to have you serve under my command." Elijah nods, a single tear tracing its way down his cheek. Admiral Ivanova looks up, meets Commander Reeves's gaze. An understanding passes between them, a recognition of the long road ahead. They have won a great victory today, but the war is far from over. There will be more battles to fight, more sacrifices to make. But as she looks at Elijah, at the determined set of his small shoulders, Admiral Ivanova knows that Earth will endure, that humanity will endure. The years had not been kind to Elijah. Though barely into his 20s, his eyes held a weariness that spoke of a lifetime of loss and hardship. He stood on the bridge of the EDF Retribution, Admiral Ivanova's flagship, staring out at the vast expanse of stars. A hand clapped him on the shoulder, startling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Admiral Ivanova herself, her once black hair now streaked with grey, her face lined with the cares of command. "We're approaching the target," she said, her voice as hard as steel. "Intel says this is where the Rakari are developing their new weapon. If we can destroy it here, we might finally have a chance to end this war." Elijah nodded, his hand unconsciously going to the locket around his neck. Inside was a hollow image of his father, the man who had given his life to save Elijah all those years ago. The Retribution shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the target coming into view on the main screen. It was a massive space station, bristling with weapons and surrounded by a fleet of Rakari warships. "All hands battle stations," Admiral Ivanova ordered, her voice echoing through the ship. "Elijah, you're with me. We're leading the strike team." Elijah followed the Admiral to the hangar bay, where a squad of Earth's finest soldiers awaited them. They boarded a dropship, the tension palpable as they rocketed towards the Rakari station. The battle was joined the moment they emerged from the dropship. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the hangar as the Earth forces engaged the Rakari defenders. Elijah fought alongside Admiral Ivanova, their weapons spitting fire as they pushed deeper into the station. Corridor by corridor, room by room, they fought their way towards the heart of the station. The Rakari resisted with a ferocity born of desperation, as if they knew that this battle could decide the fate of the war. At last, they reached the central chamber. The doors slid open, revealing a vast room filled with strange machinery, and there, standing at the center, was a figure Elijah had hoped never to see again. The Rakari commander was older, his face more lined, but his eyes burned with the same hatred Elijah remembered from that fateful day on the space station. In his hand, he held a device, his finger poised over a button. "Surrender," Zaan snarled, "or I will destroy us all." Admiral Ivanova stepped forward, her weapon trained on the general. "It's over, Zaan," she said, her voice cold. "Your weapon is destroyed, your forces scattered. You have lost." Zaan laughed, a sound devoid of mirth. "You think this is the end? No, this is just the beginning. We will never stop, never rest until your pathetic species is wiped from the galaxy." His finger tightened on the button. "If I can't have victory, I will have vengeance." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Zaan's finger began to depress the button. Admiral Ivanova fired, a bolt of plasma leaping from her weapon, but she was a fraction of a second too late. The station began to shake, alarms blaring as the self-destruct sequence initiated. Zaan fell, a smoking hole in his chest, his face frozen in a final rictus of hatred. They ran, fighting off the last pockets of Rakari resistance as they went. They reached their dropship, launching just as the station exploded behind them, a fireball consuming everything in its wake. In the aftermath, as the Earth forces regrouped and counted their losses, Elijah sat in his quarters staring at the hollow image of his father. They had won, but at what cost? How many more would have to die before the galaxy was truly free? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. He would keep fighting, keep struggling until his last breath. For his father, for Earth, for all those who had sacrificed so much. The war may be over, but the fight for peace, for freedom, for justice, that fight would never end, and Elijah would be there, on the front lines, until the very... Elijah stares at the debris drifting past his cockpit, remnants of the Rakari base splintered and scattered across the void. His hands shake on the controls, adrenaline still surging through his veins. The battle is over, but the echoes of it still reverberate in his mind. Admiral Ivanova's face flashes before his eyes, her features set in grim determination as she made her final stand. She had stayed behind, sacrificing herself to ensure the base's destruction when the self-destruct sequence faltered. Her last words, transmitted over the comm as Elijah's ship fled the expanding fireball, replay in his mind. "Remember, Elijah. Remember what we fought for." Elijah's throat tightens, tears stinging his eyes. He will remember, he will never forget. As he sits lost in thought, a proximity alert chimes on his console, jerking him back to the present. His eyes narrow as he reads the display. A ship is approaching, a vessel of unknown design. Elijah's hand hovers over the weapons controls, his muscles tensing. The war may be over, but trust is a luxury he can't afford. Too much has been lost, too much sacrificed, to let his guard down now. The comm crackles to life, the unknown ship hailing him. Elijah hesitates, his finger poised over the accept button. Then, with a deep breath, he presses it. The view screen flickers, and a face appears that Elijah hasn't seen in years, a face that has haunted his nightmares. Ymir, the Rakari who killed his father. But something is different. The rage and hatred that once burned in Ymir's eyes has been replaced by a profound sadness, a weariness that seems to emanate from his very soul. "Elijah Burns," Ymir says, his voice heavy with emotion, "I have searched for you for a long time." Elijah's grip tightens on the controls, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Why?" he manages to ask, his voice barely more than a whisper. Elijah feels as if the air has been sucked from his lungs. Of all the things he expected Ymir to say, This was not one of them. I was wrong, Ymir continues, each word seeming to cost him a great effort. I was blinded by hatred, consumed by a thirst for revenge. I thought I was fighting for my people, but in the end, I was only fighting for myself. He takes a shuddering breath, his eyes glistening. Your father, he was a good man. He didn't deserve to die. And neither did you deserve to suffer, or any of the others who paid the price for my actions. Elijah feels a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. Anger, grief, confusion. Part of him wants to lash out, to make Ymir feel a fraction of the pain he has endured. But another part, a part that sounds suspiciously like his father, urges him to listen. I know I can never make amends for what I've done, Ymir says, his voice cracking, but I want you to know that I am sorry, truly and deeply sorry. With that, he cuts the transmission, the view screen going dark. Elijah slumps back in his seat, his mind reeling. Forgiveness. It seems like such a small thing, but he knows it's not. It's a choice, a decision to release the past and move forward. And in that moment he realizes it's a choice he has to make. For his father, for Admiral Ivanova, for all those who gave their lives so that he could live. His hand trembles as he reaches out, hovering over the comm controls. Then with a deep breath he opens a channel. I'm here, he says, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. I forgive you. There is a long pause, a silence that stretches across the void. Then a single word, spoken with a depth of emotion that transcends species and language. Thank you. The channel closes and Elijah is alone once more, but he doesn't feel alone, he feels at peace. He knows the road ahead will be hard. There will be challenges, obstacles, setbacks, but he also knows that he will face them, he will endure. For he is human, and that's what humans do. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.